That's
Okay.
what we're on. So it's on right now. Did you want to introduce yourself?
If you want to do it.
Okay. I'll go and round up anyone else, and then so.
Okay. Is there a pointer?
Is there a pointer?
No, not really.
Maybe it doesn't show up very well. Well, yeah, it's pretty tiny, so
Okay.
it might be hand gestures.
Good.
Yeah. All right. Welcome back from lunch, everyone. It looks like we have most of the people here. So I'm happy to introduce Tim Liebert from the Leibniz Institute for Regional Geography. He'll be presenting about Germany, and then Nadir Kanosian will be acting as the facilitator for this panel. So with that, Tim, I'll leave it to you.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm really glad that you invited me, even though I have to confess that I am neither a resilience researcher nor am I an economic geographer. Mostly I'm standing in for Thilo Lang, who has become the father of a boy child a few weeks ago and who has decided to go on paternity leave. And Thilo is, of course, as you all know, much more knowledgeable about resilience than I am. But I think I can give you some insights on the situation in Germany. And since Germany is one of the few Western countries where manufacturing is actually increasing in importance, I decided to refocus the title a little bit and to talk about the post-industrial geographies and re-industrialization in Germany. First of all, I want to give you the big picture by looking at the country as a whole, and then I want to dive into two case studies, maybe to get more focused on the resilience aspects. One case study will be the city of Leipzig, and another case study will be a small town in Saxony-Anhalt, where we're currently doing research on a totally different topic. We're doing research on in-migration potentials, but we did some interviews with local stakeholders, and interestingly enough, the question of economic development and of community shocks was a topic that appeared quite often in our interviews. So, to start it off, I want to show you two maps about the crown jewels of the German economy that would be the small and medium-sized world market leaders. On the first map, you can see the location of the world market leaders. I want to focus on the black points, because the black points are companies that are located in rural areas. I'm sorry, the legend of the map is in German, but you can see the red colors and the orange colors. They represent central municipalities, well-accessible municipalities, while the yellow and green colors are used to highlight municipalities in rural areas and municipalities with, let's say, suboptimal transport connections, which are quite frequent in northern and some parts of southern Germany. Nevertheless, we do have a lot of very successful and even very internationally successful companies in those rural areas. In those remote rural areas, and I would say that is one aspect that I want to highlight with my presentation. If we think about industrial cities, let's say if I would do a survey on in the pedestrian street of some randomly selected German town, and I would ask people, please name 3 industrial cities. People would probably come up with cities in the Ruhr area, but they would not come up with all those tiny little rural cities that are very important for the German economy. And so that would be one aspect of my presentation. to link your attention to the rural parts and the rural industrial towns. Unfortunately, as we will see later, there is not enough data on these towns to do a proper analysis. To support this argument a little bit, I did a cluster analysis of the 401 German districts. I think I should talk a bit about the hierarchies and how Germany as a country works right now, because we heard that about the US and we heard it about Australia. And preparing the presentation, I did not really think about it. So Germany is made up of 16 federal states. 3 of those federal states are basically city-states. They consist only of 1 municipality. And we have 13 area states, Flächenländer in German. 5 of them used to be the German Democratic Republic, the eastern part of the country, with a post-socialist legacy. And the remaining 11 countries would be the western part. Below the country, below the Länder level, all Länder but the city-states are divided into districts, and the districts are divided into municipalities. And there are currently, I think, 12,800 municipalities in Germany. And like in Australia, like in the US, of the 13 area states, each has its own system of municipalities and municipal self-government, and they differ very much from one another. Contrary to the situation in Victoria, the municipalities do have finances, even though they complain all the time that they are short of money, but they do have some income sources, they do have some tax bases, but they have more or less limited power with respect to economic development. I will come back to that later in the case studies. I don't have the time to go into detail with the cluster analysis. I used the proportion of the workforce being employed in the major branches of the economy, or the major sector of the economy. Actually, I did not use agriculture and mining for the calculation because there are few people employed in agriculture and also few people employed in mining, and the differences between the districts are very high. But I want to highlight the clusters 5 and 6, which would be the most important regions for manufacturing in Germany. And you can see on the one hand, they are clustered in the southern part of the country, and on the other hand, most of these districts are rural districts. So there are those small little dots that would be urban districts, which consist of just one urban municipality, and the rural district consists of several municipalities. And industry is concentrated in Germany, actually, more or less in the rural parts of the country. And if we look at the development between 2000 and 2015, with respect to workforce employed in manufacturing, the number of workers decreased in Germany as a whole by about 4%. I colored the city-states in red, the western states in blue, and the eastern states in dark blue. And you can see that, especially in eastern Germany, but also in Bavaria, the proportion of people, or the number of people working in industry has actually increased since 2000. Which is no surprise in the eastern part of the country, because after the end of state socialism, practically the whole industrial basis of these parts of the country more or less disappeared. And now we are witnessing a slow reindustrialization of eastern Germany, and then again, especially in the rural areas. While the change of the economy to a service economy is much more pronounced in the large cities and in Western Germany. So, and if we look at the district level, here I colored the rural districts in West Germany in a light green, in East Germany in a dark green. The urban districts in East Germany are in a dark blue, in a dark red, sorry, and in West Germany they are in a light red. And I just put the 8 districts with the highest increase in the workforce in manufacturing in the diagram, and 8 districts with the largest decreases. And you can see that some of the traditional industrial cities, like Bochum in the Ruhr area, or Cottbus, which is in a mining area in Lusitania, they are losing their base in manufacturing, while on the other hand, rural areas are becoming increasingly more industrial. And also the city of Leipzig was able to increase the number of workers in manufacturing. I will use the city of Leipzig as a case study later on and go deeper into what has happened there. I repeated the cluster analysis with the part of the GDP in cost prices for the same structure of the economy, and the picture is basically the same. So the most important parts of the most important manufacturing parts of Germany are located in the south, while especially the big cities now have a service economy, and they cannot really be considered industrial cities anymore, but post-industrial cities. And if you look at the Ruhr area, which would be here, you can also see there is not much industry left compared to the overall average. So my interim conclusions would be that the spatial pattern of manufacturing in Germany is changing. The traditional industrial cities have already become post-industrial economies, which are dominated by the service and the public sector. Especially the university towns are very much dominated by public sector employment. And I guess the same what Sally said about Victoria and Melbourne also applies to these cities. And there are a few remaining industrial cities which are dominated by one big company and its core suppliers, like Ingolstadt, where they're manufacturing Audi, Bayer with Leverkusen with the chemical company Bayer, Ludwigshafen with BASF, and Wolfsburg with Volkswagen. Manufacturing is increasingly concentrated in small and medium-sized towns in rural districts, and these are often locally rooted family businesses. And there is also evidence of reindustrialization in East Germany after a long period of deindustrialization, and then again, not really in the traditional industrial areas, but in rural districts that have been dominated more or less by agriculture, small industries, and service in the service sector already in the GDR. So with respect to research on post-industrial resilience in Germany, even though it's not really my field of work, but I think it's necessary to look into the resilience of and the patterns of manufacturing in rural areas, especially since there are specific situations and specific challenges connected to economic development at this spatial level. Especially that there is a strong intra-local competition, a strong competition between the small municipalities for investors and for jobs, a low level of recognition. If I would go back to the first map, there are some places where world market leaders have their headquarters are mentioned on this map, and even I, who has worked a lot with German municipalities, and I've done considerable research going through tables with all the names of the municipalities. Even I don't recognize them. And so if you think about international investors, they would probably never even heard about the regional center of the region, but nevertheless about all those small villages and small towns. There is a low level of influence of the regional political leaders that may be different for the mayors of the big city. So if the mayor of Leipzig, maybe he would be able to phone Angela Merkel, but probably not a mayor of a city with 10,000 or even less inhabitants. And there is some sort of low professionalism of local administrations. Many districts may have officials who are in charge of looking after investors, who are in charge of attracting investors, but usually they have something else to do. They may additionally be the P&R guys for the district, or they may be in charge for agriculture. Few districts, if any, have a specific economic plan to attract investors. It's more like they describe their specific locational advantages and give you a number of people to call. I looked it up for my hometown, which is a village of 6,500 inhabitants, and the mayor invites potential investors to call him. So in the larger cities, they have specialized offices to deal with this task. Okay, now I would come to my two little case studies. Above you can see the market square with the church and the town hall of Genthin, which is a small country town of less than 15,000 inhabitants in the state of Saxony-Anhalt. And below you can see the skyline of Leipzig, which is one of Germany's larger cities. Let's start with Genthin. This is a map of the state of Saxony-Anhalt, and I calculated the population development between 1990 and 2015, and the darker blue the municipalities are, the more population they lost. Genthin is this one here, and the population decreased from almost 21,000 people in 1990 to less than 15,000 people in 2015. That is by about 30%. The city witnesses a high outmigration, especially of young adults, a dynamic aging, and against this backdrop, young people moving out, the remaining population ages. It is increasingly unlikely that the depopulation trend will change somewhere in the near future. The city has experienced a series of losses after reunification. In GDR times, there were two big employers, a sugar refinery, which closed in 1992, and the detergent factory. I will come back to that later. And Genthin had been the capital of a district since 1816, since the city became Prussian. And in 1994, as part of overarching administrative reforms in Saxony-Anhalt, they merged the district of Genthin with the neighboring district of Burg, and the city of Burg became the new capital of the district. So Genthin also lost a significant part of jobs in the public sector. For instance, the Adult Education Center, which was also moved to Burg. The branch railway line to Sandau, a nearby town, closed in 1999. In 2009, the detergent factory closed. In 2017, the hospital closed. There is actually no hospital around in a circle of, I think, 30 or 40 kilometers. So this leads to the population being underserved medically, and what is still present is two schools, the Sekundarschule and the Gymnasium, probably comparable to the American high school. They have direct trains to Berlin and Hamburg, running every hour. The Elbe-Havel-Canal runs through the city, which is part of a continuous waterway from the rivers Rhine to Oder, from West Europe to Poland. And they have an indirect motorway connection. You have to drive about 20 minutes from the nearest motorway to the city. Like I said, the detergent factory used to be the cornerstone of the local economy. It was founded in 1921 and used to be the production site of Persil, part of the Henkel company. Was nationalized by the Soviet military administration, later became a people's enterprise, and they developed the detergent Spee, which is still very popular today and used to be the best-selling detergent of the GDR. In 1990, Henkel repurchased the factory, but moved the production to Düsseldorf in West Germany in 2007. and closed the factory totally in 2009. And after that, different investors have bought the factory. Some went bankrupt. But at the moment, it seems that the situation is improving. Like I said, we do a different project in the city. So we had in-depth discussions with the mayor, with regional economic leaders, and with a representative of the labor market office. And the mayor actually said that the economic situation of Genthin is quite good, but the local population doesn't recognize it. And I think this is something that is also relevant with respect to the resilience discussion, that experts may have a different view of the economic situation of a given area than the local population, and the local population may be deeply pessimistic, which is actually the case in this part of Saxony-Anhalt as well. With respect to the local unemployment rate, he said that basically they have full employment, and the 8% unemployment that is registered is, according to him, impossible to employ long-term unemployed, people with drug problems, people with alcohol problems. So actually he paints a picture of a community that has managed to turn its fate around, at least economically. And the big problem that is troubling him at the moment is the skills shortage. And against this backdrop, he also talked about attracting a big investor, a big company. And he said that they don't really want that because new big companies would suck out the qualified staff from the small local companies and threaten the small local companies. And of course, the big investors would be branch plants and have no real connection to the area at all. But he also said that investors will be treated like God in France. I think he mixed up the proverb a bit, and will be treated like the king, and the city administration will bend backwards to have them every way they can, because creating jobs is the top political goal. And the group discussion with the other experts largely confirmed the mayor's view. So if we turn now from one small town to one of the biggest towns in Germany, to Leipzig. Leipzig is a city with about 600,000 inhabitants, and some of you may remember that Leipzig used to be a shrinking town in the past. So between 1990 and 2000, Leipzig lost about 1% of its population per year. But since the 2000s, Leipzig has become the fastest growing city in Germany. And I think you can also see that what we've heard about the US this morning, that the central cities are losing population, is not true in Germany, because most of the central cities in Germany are actually gaining population. There is a strong reurbanization trend that also affects traditional industrial cities like Essen and Dortmund in the Ruhrgebiet, although not as spectacularly like it does Leipzig. And the situation is also different if we look at the urban region as a whole. So it's true that also the suburban and rural municipalities in the hinterland of the big municipalities are growing, mostly. Leipzig and Dresden are exceptions to this rule, but actually the core cities are growing at a faster rate than the suburban and rural areas in Germany. So the situation is obviously totally different from what we have heard this morning in the US. So if we look at the economic history of Leipzig, Leipzig used to be one major commercial cities. Even in the Middle Ages, it was one of the most important trade fair towns in Europe, and also an important center of higher education since 1409, when the University of Leipzig was founded. In the age of industrialization, the economic basis of the city were the production of books, printing, engineering, and the textile industry. And Leipzig was also a stronghold of the labor movement. It's the place where the German Social Democratic Party was founded, and also one of its predecessors. and the city managed to reinvent itself as a trade town around the turn of the century with a samples exhibition. During the socialist times, the industry structure was reoriented to comply with the socialist ideals of industry, with a new focus on heavy machinery construction, on chemical industry, on power generation. Around Leipzig, there are coal fields with rather bad coal, but they were extracted in socialist times in surface mining. So if you would have visited Leipzig in the 1980s, you would have seen a dirty city with a lot of air and water pollution, a lot of vacant houses. But it was an industrial city. And with German unification, the number of industry employees decreased dramatically. In 1989, 130,400 people were employed in the combines and the industrial factories of Leipzig. And in 2006, this number had gone down to less than 33,000. And with that came out-migration, and we have already seen the population development, which is largely explained by the bad environmental conditions and the huge losses in industry. In the region, they try to follow the historical pathways and to re-attract the traditional industries, but that failed completely. So we can talk about a shifting economic base in Leipzig. There is an increasing importance of the service sector, as in all major cities, especially in media, culture, and education. But they also managed to attract new plants, in brackets, mostly branch plants. For instance, in automotive manufacturing, there is a Porsche plant and a BMW plant in Leipzig. And in logistics, DHL and Amazon are present at the airport, which is one of the few, if not the only airport in Germany with very lax regulations on flights at night. So it's a very important site for logistics. Problem is, most of the companies are just extended workbenches. There are few corporate headquarters, and a few commercial R&D departments. The second problem is that the new development path, there was no real qualified staff available at the Leipzig labor market, for instance, for the automotive industry. So new employees came from other parts of Germany, or they switched from companies with a similar qualification profile, which in a way hurt the local economic base and the small companies in the region. Nevertheless, the share of the workforce went down from 27% in 1991 who worked in industry to just 8%. So with 8% of the workforce employed in industry, you cannot really say that Leipzig is an industrial town anymore. Since 2005, the unemployment is going down. Labor force participation is increasing. The city is growing. And the city administration has devised a strategy to strengthen 5 economic clusters. One would be the automotive industry and the component suppliers, with almost 15,000 employees in 2015. Then there is a healthcare and biotechnology cluster, which is linked to the University of Leipzig and other research institutions. An energy and environmental engineering cluster, a logistics cluster linked to the Halle Leipzig Airport, and the media and creative economy cluster. So the city is known as a cool place in Germany. Some people compare it and say Leipzig is the new Berlin. There is even the moniker Leipzig is Hypezig, is a city that is very much hyped. And so that would be the parts of the economy the city wants to strengthen, and this cluster strategy is of course supported by important research facilities like the University of Leipzig and leading non-university research institutions, several members of the Leibniz Association, where also IFL belongs to, although we are not part of any of these clusters. the Max Planck, the Helmholtz, and the Fraunhofer associations or societies, which are the associations that combine the basic research institutions in Germany. So to sum it up, what have we learned from the two case studies? In the larger cities, it's obviously a bit easier to turn the fate around because they have some political clout. They have professional administrations that can devise strategies. But the situation is very much different in small municipalities that really don't have much to bargain with. They don't have much to woo investors with. And yeah, thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tim, for a very interesting presentation. I will facilitate the discussion. I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to do, but I'll give my reflection, and then we will proceed with questions. I think it is extremely important to understand the differences between Europe, Germany, and the US, and the level of coordination and planning and state investment is quite different. So that we should somehow take into account when we draw parallels and do a comparative study. Another thing that came to my mind is that this is sort of counterintuitive that leading companies, globally leading companies, are based in rural areas where people don't even know the name of the place. It's not Silicon Valley, it's not Boston, it's not even Albany. It's some place where a company is based, and it's a champion, global champion. So that sort of challenges the assumptions of innovation theory, that it should be some kind of dense environment where people exchange ideas and they sort of within that environment create new knowledge. So they must have there must be other ways of creating knowledge, not necessarily based upon some localized processes. And sometimes that is described as knowledge pipeline, or it must be some sort of innovation, creativity process that we know little about. The size of the city, and small city versus large city. Personally, I find smaller cities much more interesting because they have to fight for things that are often given to larger cities, and it's an interesting research topic. So I would invite questions. Leonid was first.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's very interesting, your finding that industrialization now happens in rural areas. And I don't think that it's in contradiction with the theory, because if it's mass production with some ordinary technologies, you don't need agglomeration. It is not the question of innovations. For innovations, you need diversity and agglomeration effect and exchange of ideas and so on. But for mass production, it's enough to have economy of scale, and because now transportation costs are very low, it's not necessarily to be located near big markets, and if labor force is cheaper and low, not very qualified, not needed for this production, so the best place maybe in countryside with dense population. If you have enough, workers, no problem. But could it be sustainable? This is the question, because with technological changes. This is the point. That in big metropolitan areas you have big diversity, and it's engine of producing innovations. And when you change technologies, it's easy to move to some new technological wave and so on. But in such places, when a new technology comes, this company would be closed and people left unemployed. So this maybe demonstrate now sort of resilience, but is it sustainable or not? Especially at longer period of time, it's a question. And second, well, just comment, but you may have your opinion on this. And second comment is that you mentioned. It's interesting that you mentioned that in these places, quality of administrations are not sufficient, and people don't have experience of dealing with investors, and also maybe they are sort of populist leaders or something like this if population is poor. So how could it be improved, and how you see it? You mentioned the competition between such places, so it's also competition in this field, I think, and what can be done to improve this situation?
Okay.
Do you want to collect more questions?
No, I just answered. To start with your first question, given the high production costs in Germany, not much of the industrial base of the rural areas is actually mass production. There are some parts of the economy, especially, I think I do have a microphone. There are some parts of the economy that are increasing in East Germany that belong to this cluster, which would be the food industry. They are also heavily subsidized and employ a workforce coming from other EU countries. So the local labor market effects are not really big. But most of the industry we have, also in the rural area, is not really mass production, but it's German engineering. So it's the puzzle that Nadia described is actually part of a research project we're doing right now at IFL to better understand how world market leaders and high-tech manufacturing companies come to be located in rural areas, why they are still in rural areas and why they don't want to change that, and how they actually manage to replace this thick institutional environment that creates innovation with other ways than just spatial proximity. But this is ongoing research, and it's not one of my research projects, but done by another colleague. So maybe we just have to wait a bit until they publish their results. The second aspect of your question, the quality of local administration, I think that is something that can actually not be changed at all, because if you think about little municipalities, depending on the federal states, they don't even have a full-time mayor. The mayor is a volunteer who gets a small recompense for being mayor of a municipality after his working day. Maybe he has a secretary, but that's basically all. So there are many small municipalities who don't really have any administration at all. People in rural areas of Germany love to elect independent mayors, and they love to elect mayors that have a background in administration. So they usually know how to administer a community. They know the laws, but mostly they don't speak the same language as investors would do, and there's not really something that can be changed, because many municipalities are just too small to have a full-time mayor, and even if they have a full-time mayor, he doesn't have an administrative department. In the larger municipalities where you are professionally a mayor. They have like 2 or 3 offices dealing with marriages and birth registration and the local companies. But that's not really a professional administration like the big cities have. They just don't have the resources for that.
Hey, I have 2 questions. One is that it's really cool to see a study of a small place, a very small place, in this context. I think that when we study resilience in smaller places, in some ways, it's really important to widen the lens on that because people can move around so much outside of that place. So I'm curious as to whether communities around in that area are also experiencing similar downturns. And similar deindustrializations, or whether there are, in neighboring villages and towns, whether there are opportunities for people. And in a related question, one of the most staggering things I saw on your slide there that you mentioned was that it lost its rail link to, I don't know where, someplace that started with an S, Sabao or Sandow. How big of a deal was that? And because to me, we were talking about rail at lunch, that is so important in Europe, and that sort of feels a little like the kiss of death to a place like this, where obviously people have cars and can move around, but that would just be such a huge signal of, this place isn't as important anymore. And it's not even really on the way to anywhere important, I guess, if you're going to close it down. So I'd like to know what that issue, whether that was very significant.
Okay, I start with the second question. Objectively, it was absolutely no big deal because it was a branch line with a low number of riders every day. But the symbolic dimension of the closure is much higher. That's why I established the timeline. So in the 1990s, there was a loss after a loss after a loss, and in that situation, even the closing of a small railway line becomes significant for the local population, and becomes significant even if they have never used this line. And to give you another example, in the region of Leipzig, we did a study on how to improve the future prospects of the district of Northern Saxony, and I was invited to the northernmost town of Saxony to present the results in a session of the community council. And the speaker before me was a representative of the Regional Planning Association, and he told the municipal council why this small town of 2,500 inhabitants will not be considered a central place anymore, which is also not really a big deal because it's largely symbolic. There are a few subsidies, but they would get these subsidies anyway because they are demographically very challenged. And the members of the town council and the citizens that were there were very agitated, and that's because the city lost its railway connection, the city lost its secondary school, the city lost its hospital and lost everything, and now this is sort of the last and final blow. And against this backdrop, even objectively unimportant closures have a very high significance for the local population. Regarding your first question, usually the situation is more or less the same in the neighboring villages and towns. So Germany can be described as a country of commuters. Commuting is a very big deal, and there is a large proportion of the workforce that commutes more than 150 or 300 kilometers. Probably if they commute more than 300 kilometers, they only do that on paper, but have a little flat where they work. But commuting is very, very widespread. So that on the one hand sort of counterbalances economic shocks. But on the other hand, especially in Eastern Germany, we're talking about depressed regions, not just depressed communities, but depressed regions. And the situation is maybe a little bit better in the neighboring community, but most likely not. And especially very small villages, they don't have any economic base at all. Maybe they have a little agriculture, maybe they have some people doing business from home, but actually they have to commute to get somewhere. So we're talking actually about regions that are economically challenged.
To look at some U.S. cities that are post-industrial that are coming back, Pittsburgh and others, they've made a lot of quality of life investments, whether it's mobility with greenways or bike paths or cultural amenities or outdoor amenities with amphitheaters. But even with those, I mean, I don't think we have any that are growing as quickly as you're showing Leipzig growing. Did the community intentionally invest in quality of life things to try to attract people there, or was there just so much industrial growth that drove it?
That's a tough question. I wouldn't say that they really invested in any specific quality of life projects. But on the other hand, I would say how cities are perceived is different in Germany than in the US, because from the literature I get the impression that there is a certain anti-urban sentiment in many Anglo-Saxon countries, and that is not so strong in most parts of Europe and is certainly not so strong in Germany. So I think there has been a re-evaluation of what people consider to be quality of life. So a big part of this whole reurbanization discussion is also that people tend to value what cities have to offer more than they did in the past. And so they did renovate the historical buildings, they built new schools, they built new parks, but it's nothing unusual compared with what other cities did that don't grow so quickly. And why Leipzig is growing so quickly is, for many people, actually a puzzle. And I would say this perception that Leipzig is a cool place is very much a very big part of it. So it's like the Matthew principle. Those who have, they will be given. And I think that's what we see in Leipzig as well. One aspect that is perhaps not so true is if you. I'm also part of the expert group who does the population forecast, and we discuss our assumptions. And when we discuss our assumptions, the economic situation surfaces very quickly, and many experts, even in the city department, believe that Leipzig is an economically weak city, which it is not if you look at the statistics. So that's what makes the growth even more difficult to understand from their point of view, because they see, okay, it's a cool place with a high recognition. It's a university town and an important research town, but it's economically weak anyway. So that's actually something that needs more research. But I think. And that's probably a bad news for other cities that don't have this reputation. I'm not very familiar with the reputation of American cities, but I imagine the reputation of Pittsburgh is not really stellar. But so that would make attracting new people and business probably more difficult than in a city that has a very good reputation. Even though I've been to Pittsburgh and I thought it's a nice place in a nice landscape environment, but yeah, I think it's difficult to get to shed this old industrial town image. And probably the good thing about Leipzig is that it never was considered as an old industrial town, but as a trade fair town and a commercial town.
I'm curious, Tim, the manufacturing in the smaller towns and cities, again, it's concentration there. One of the kind of explanations or narratives I've heard for that over here, and I don't know if it's true, is that these places tend to specialize in high-quality precision manufacturing rather than mass production. Is that a correct characterization? Is that it?
Yep. In most cases, especially in the southern part of the country, in Baden-Württemberg, where I come from, it's actually family-owned businesses with a very long tradition and very strong roots to the local population and the local municipalities, who also do very much, the entrepreneurs do very much for their communities. So they are very much, I think rooted is the best word I can think about. And that probably also explains why they choose to keep their location in these rural areas. Because it's also a family thing and an emotional thing.
Tom, how are we doing in terms of one more question, right? Yeah.
I was just reading about the European Union's Smart Specialization System platform, and I was wondering how much of what you've done in Leipzig was informed by that, or did you receive EU funding for any of the changes that have been occurring?
It's difficult to answer your questions because I don't know if Leipzig has participated in any of these initiatives. But on a general level, Leipzig is very active in attracting European funds. So probably if there is money available, they have at least tried to get it. And that's also a part of the professionalism of administrations. Small administrations cannot fill out those bureaucratic forms to attract subsidies. And big administrations, they can hire specialized personnel to do that.
Maybe one last question, and I'm quite familiar to the German context, and you mentioned this hidden champions everywhere in Germany, and I was wondering why this region there not looking into other hidden champions, little local areas in Baden-Württemberg or other states in former West Germany, or is it happening that they look, where are there still the success stories, they can keep the companies there, and they're still engaging their communities and stuff like that is happening in also in East Germany, or?
So that is actually the map I did not say anything about. That one here is the Hidden Champions founded after 1990. And there are some new hidden champions in East Germany. And actually the East German states fared a little bit better than the Western ones. And fared especially a little bit better than the traditional Western ones with many world market leaders. But still, it's a long way to go. And the necessary environment has to be created. And we should not forget, I didn't mention that, but we should not forget the post-socialist legacy of this region, and that there is more often than not an entrepreneurial spirit, but people wait for the new big investor to open a new big company, a new big factory, and that all problems will be solved. And I think that is also a part of this socialist heritage that divides East Germany and West Germany economically, that the West German population is more entrepreneurial to begin with. But things are changing.
Thank you. We have time for just a short 15-minute refreshment break, and then we'll have the presentation from Leonie.
our limitations in comparing Star Wars to the founding of Christianity. Well, I mean, I would say it's sort of no, I mean, I'm just saying, like, on the narrative, like, right, and like, the narrative arc of everything, there is a, like, sure, yeah, right. A lot of those rules and kosher living, those sort of get wiped away at the end. You know, there's the don't eat pork, trust me, I know. But it's
You guys know how to use the fly.
Oh man, this is because I've got 2 cups of coffee.
which of you is speaking first? Okay. It's on already. Yeah, that'll work.
This is microphone.
Yep. I'll just put it there.
Okay.
Right.
And this.
It's on already. So if it's green, it's on. Right, so it's on.
And can I put it in the pocket? Or?
Yeah, it'll be fine.
No problem.
And then on the computer, you can use the arrows,
Yeah.
or you can use the clicker.
Yeah, okay.
I think it'll still work. You might want to try it just to see. Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
All right. Great.
Okay.
So I'll go ahead and introduce you. I can
Sit here.
All right. Hello, everyone. All right, so we're ready to go ahead and get started with our last panel here.
People still excited.
People are still excited.
After the break. Cannot stop
Yeah, I'll give it.
communication.
Hi, everyone. All right. So our last panel for this afternoon is post-industrial resilience in Russia. Before that, I just wanted to make two short announcements. One, for the people who are leaving on the train tomorrow, you can go ahead and leave all of your luggage over at the Westin Hotel, because that's where we'll catch the cab from there. So you can leave your luggage there. You don't have to bring it over in the morning.
Tell them you're leaving here.
To check out in the morning and to leave luggage.
So you'll check out in the morning and you can leave your luggage there at the Westin at the front desk. And then after this panel, we're going to try to get everyone together and have a class photo is what you might call it. So we'll have a way to memorialize what happened here and who was all around. So try to stay here for that. After this panel, we'll also have a reception. You can see that they're already setting up. So I'm happy to introduce Leonid Limonov and Marina Nasina. They're with the Leontief Center in St. Petersburg and also the National Research University Higher School of Economics. And this panel will be facilitated by Vera Smirnova, who's a student with the Global Forum. And so with that, I'll leave it to Leonid.
Yeah, thank you. So we'll tell you about briefly about the urban system in Russia and its historical formation, because it's important to understand big differences between, Russia, European urban system, American, and so on. I think Russia is very specific. Then we'll concentrate on small cities and resilience issues and differences of population of small cities and big cities. Marina will present results of European survey of values. And then we have a number of cases of more or less resilient towns. But if we don't have time, we'll present just a couple of them and leave the rest to Roanoke workshop to discuss more different paths to find new growth after decline. Okay, so this is a picture of urbanization in Russia, including forecast made by United Nations. We see that share of urban population is more or less it's urbanization continuing after some stabilization, but it's mostly because of national republics, which are less developed and still very agrarian. And rural population is declining. Then cities by size of population. Here it's important that small cities still play an important role, something like 43% even in this forecast. And in terms of So it's declining, but last 10 or 20 years, this decline is not very rapid, and it will continue to be important. So in public policy, at all levels, so they should pay more attention to the future, to the situation of these small towns, not necessarily located in metropolitan areas and maybe located somewhere far away from big centers, but still a lot of population may be blocked there. Maybe it's a case of poverty trap. Maybe, mobility of population is not very high in Russia, comparing with America especially, and it's not easy. It's the reason is a lot of costs of this moving to other places, sharp differences in real property prices. So it's not easy to sell your house and to buy something in big city. Plus some administrative restrictions, plus psychological difficulties, and I don't know. And in terms of population in small cities and towns, there are more than 50 million people. So it's about 1/3 of total population and about half of urban population. Briefly, it's long text. Briefly, history of formation of urban system, because historically, first cities were founded in Russia on the rivers. The purpose were sort of military, to control trade by rivers, and then they had some trade and some crafts around these fortresses. And later it continued in Siberia, Far East, Far North, by Kazakhs, who established also the sort of burgs, the ostrogs, to provide sort of military control. So military purposes of defense or military control were prevailing over economic reasons. And that's why these places, especially in the east, located very far from each other. And now it's a heritage with which it's difficult to deal. All communications, transport are not cheap. To maintain. Then under Peter the Great, the 18th century, development of some industries, especially extraction of raw materials, especially production of metal, again for military purposes. Then under Catherine II, many new towns were established, especially in the south, and old towns were rebuilt according to master plans, introducing regular plans. Then only after abolition of serfdom in 1861, development of industrial development, industrial revolution in Russia started, and some cities became centers of trade and industries, and a lot of settlements were established near big industrial plants, because they built plants near raw materials and imported people from other places and built for them a sort of settlement. And then later, in Soviet period, these settlements became cities, sometimes big cities after industrialization. So in the Soviet period, not only industrialization was important, but because of international situation and the danger of the war, they tried to establish new industrial production far from Western borders. and a lot of enterprises moved to the east. Then during the Second World War, a lot of enterprises were evacuated when German troops approached. And after the war, this system sort of survived. So some facilities moved back, but at that place in the east, they still continued to have some branches or some other plans. For statistics, it's an importance that because there are a lot of these industrial settlements, there is a question how to distinguish between cities and settlements with urban function. And at some moment, they recognized a number of such settlements as cities. Then later, some such cities disappeared because they became part of bigger cities, or again, they were recognized as settlements, not as the cities. Also, there are interesting research by Tatiana Mikhailova on the influence of Gulag system on allocation of labor force, because during this Stalinist period, a lot of prisoners in camps were used as slaves, you see, as a labor force, not paid labor force, and they not only extracted raw materials but also built a lot of railways, canals, and a lot of constructions in cities. Or they built plants and some housing near these plants. And her evaluation is the influence of Gulag on the spatial structure, spatial economic structure of Russia is bigger than the influence of the Second World too. But of course, after post-war period, and especially after 1990, after transition to market economy and liberalization in this sense, this non-market reasons of allocation are less evident, and some market incentives and market factors started to be important. These are how Soviet geographers and some foreign geographers defined the system of cities in the Soviet Union. They have this hierarchy of diversified administrative centers. They were capitals of Union republics, like Kiev and Minsk and so on, Tbilisi. Then local centers at the district level, industrial cities specialized in manufacturers or in mining or mixed use, transportation hubs, transport centers, resorts, centers of education and research. It was an idea to create sort of technopolises and so on, but it didn't succeed with only very few exceptions. Naval bases, also seaports, and some suburbs. So this is, I may escape this, that it's the fact that in post-Soviet period, as I said, some cities disappeared, some former closed administrative territorial formations became normal cities. That were also in Soviet times so-called closed cities with some military or scientific production financed directly from central budget and not functioning as a normal local administrations. So they were transformed into normal municipalities. Okay, this is distribution of cities by gross rate, and depending on the number of citizens. So we see that small towns have a very big variety. Most of them have diminishing population, up to 70%. At the same time, there are many ones which demonstrate growth during this period from 91. And in total, it's about, well, in total we have about 1,100 cities and towns, and out of them, 200 demonstrate economic growth. And then we selected 100 which have growth or stable population during last, how many years? During last 10 years. If we take ZIP law, we see that in Russia, in a way, big cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg, it's here. Moscow, St. Petersburg. They are not big enough. And small cities, there are too many and they are too small. If the ZIP law is the law, nobody knows. But some countries, for most of European countries, the law is very exact, but not in Russia. This is distribution of cities by size, by big macro regions. Here we see that most of small cities we have in central district, and also Volga region and northwest. So also European historical part of Russia. This is a climate map. So just to understand that everything which is blue and light blue and dark blue, all this area are not favorable for living. Not recommended. So only yellow and orange and red. Well, red is too hot maybe. So more than 2/3 of Russia are areas with the climate not favorable for permanent residence. This is a map of cities fewer than 100,000, and from 100,000 to 200. So all cities less than 250,000 population. Yes, so here blue are big city, between 100 and 250, and green are less than 100,000. So what we see here that many towns and cities are located in that zone with severe climate. Also because natural resources, unfortunately, located there where it is not possible to live. And something should be done to extract them. Yes, so present situation, present structure is that we have diversified administrative centers. These are cities of federal importance like Moscow, St. Petersburg, then capitals of the subjects of the Russian Federation. There are different subjects like oblast, krai, national republics, autonomous national districts, and all this, altogether it's 85 subjects of federation. Then there are mining cities, manufacturing cities, local centers which are centers of municipal districts, then technopolises like near Novosibirsk, Akadem Gorodok, academic town, cities or towns with historical heritage or with nice natural resources around. and resorts. Okay, it's also seashore or lakes or thermal waters. So what capacities of resilience for cities in non-core areas? Of course, cities in non-core areas can survive. I mean, all cities and towns in Moscow region demonstrate very good indicators of economic growth and industrial growth and income growth and so on. But for others, it's specialization in mining and processing, especially oil and gas and other demanded sectors, specialization in tourism, natural resources, or cultural heritage, specialization in research and development, but there are very few such places not in core areas. And they are former these special closed cities, especially in nuclear, I mean production and other military technologies. Then we have urbanization and national republics, which I mentioned. So we have very poor population in some national republics, in the Caucasus, for example, but with very high rate of unemployment. But still we see the growing of urban population because people move to these cities from countryside, which is even poorer than these cities. And also location near the state borders. So it's some logistical functions, transport, customs, so on. Institutional context, briefly, I'll tell more about the system of self-government because it's important. Also maybe about strategic planning, but using cases and public programs and projects. And an important issue of intermunicipal cooperation, but it is developed only at inter-budgetary level, only at vertical level, and very few good examples of real cooperation at horizontal level, unfortunately. Yes, so I will first tell several words about self-government. The self-government was introduced only in 2001 by federal law after long discussions. It exists at two levels, municipal districts and settlements, but also there are urban districts for bigger cities, and there are some now municipalities which are districts inside big cities. And they are not self-sufficient. Normally they are heavily subsidized by regions, and most of regions also subsidized by federal level because most of revenues collected at the federal level. And then it's a complicated system of redistribution of revenues to make for municipalities and regions possible to provide functions they are obliged to provide. So they calculate how much they need to provide main functions for 100%, but then after calculation of the budget of the regional level, they say we equilibrize everybody at the level of 65% from the need, or 70%. And then if you have 71%, you have nothing. If you have, 65, you have 5% needed. Towns and small cities now are subject of concern also at federal level. And there are several federal programs which deal with, or should deal with, problems of some specific towns. So one is a federal program, integrated development of mono towns, which should provide some money, some support to mono towns where the main employer is in crisis or closed. Then priority project formation of a comfortable urban environment it's not really started, but idea is to improve quality of urban environment, like yards, streets, some upgrading, I mean greening and so on. Federal program development of culture and tourism. Some historical towns may get support from there. And also there are some projects like local economic development of small towns, which is of historical small towns, which was designed to be financed through the loan of the World Bank. And now it is not clear with the World Bank, but maybe some other international financial institutions could support it. Yeah, so this is a system of self-government. I already told about it. Main issues of self-government, they are responsible for many things. Yeah, so mainly school education, basic health care, security. These are main articles of expenditures, of course. Then, well, waste collection, municipal roads construction, and many things. And also they regulate many things. They are responsible for territorial planning, to provide master plans, land use regulation. And when we talk about municipalities or small towns, of course, they are not able to do this. They have no competence and maybe not money. So settlements normally delegate these functions to districts. And the system slowly coming to the old Soviet system, where there were bigger districts responsible for many villages and small towns and so on. Yeah, so we see that for bigger cities there are more responsibilities, more functions than in smaller ones. But even with this smaller number, small settlements are not able to deal. And then Marina will talk about differences of population in big cities and small cities.
It was a question how to present culture, norms, and rules. And so we find in one way we used European Social Survey just to compare what people attitude and values have in small cities in comparing with big cities in Russia. If you look at the education level, of course it is a sample, there is biases, but at the same time, mainly education level is a little bit low in general and on one level. With difference in statistically significant, it's not a surprise. But if you look at the subjective well-being, we see that mainly we have mainly not significant, not about 10% significant, so it's not significant level, but there is no difference in subjective well-being between small and big cities, but there is variation inside regions, because, for instance, people on the south in Volga region, in the South Federal region, people are more happy in small cities than in Siberia and Far East. If you look at the people trust, we see that it is not significant. There is no significant difference between big and small cities. Russian people usually have medium kind of people, trust to people, and if you look at the values, so Russian people, the smaller values show more importance of this value. In tradition and in security tradition, universalism and benevolence are more important values for Russian people. But at the same time, we see the difference between small and big cities. It is statistically significant in following the tradition and conformity. In benevolence and universalism, it's more valuable for people who are living in small cities. At the same time, achievement, of course, it's and success are more important for people who live in bigger cities. Regarding attitude about government support, how government should reduce inequalities in society, we have slightly significant results that in small cities more rely on government in reducing inequalities. And the same story about welfare attitude. People in small cities vote for welfare state more than people in big cities. Regarding religiosity, it's an answer to a question about how often do you pray. And people, usually in big cities and small cities, there is no difference. I would say that there is no difference in religiosity. Religiosity is not high, except in North Caucasian regions where Muslims, really Muslim population live. And it's because of heritage of Soviet time, maybe people are not too diversified in this in religiosity. And so, Leonid.
Okay, I'll finish with presentation of some cases. Just maybe two cases. For example, city of Novoshakhtinsk, it's in Rostov region near Ukrainian border. It was mining of coal, was developed mostly as a city. It became in Soviet times, but before that it was a number of coal mines. Then you see very rapid growth of population, then stabilization, then decrease in population in the beginning of 90s, and then they restore the population. Now it's slowly declining, but not dramatically. So most of this coal industry enterprises were closed. And from 97 till 2000, the number of population employed in coal industry decreased 2 times, from 12,000 till 6,000 people. And here are figures of all declining in all industrial areas. Light industry disappeared, and other industries also had problems. But they used the geographical position at the state border. They participated in several programs to get some support. They developed the strategic plan and other policy documents and investment programs. And they decided to develop mostly as a transportation and logistical center to attract investment in some other industries. For that, they created business like business incubator, small business support funds, and so on. So they have some good results. These are in rubles, but taking into account inflation, main key indicators increased from 2 times till 4 times during 9 years. Yeah? Its turnover of small business increased more than twice. Share of products shipped by small business, investment in fixed assets. So indicators of small business are very good. They have a number of investment projects implemented and under implementation. But these are more logistical functions plus some manufacturing of construction materials and some other secondary importance investments, including hypermarket, as they call it. I don't know, hypermarket, supermarket. Total amount of investments increased. So they changed the functions from mining to transport and logistics. It is not in pure terms post-industrial, but it's sort of reinventing themselves. The other example is Chistopol in Tatarstan Republic at Volga. They also had the industrial enterprises. For example, they had a big factory producing watch. They mostly decided to use their historical heritage, and they are part of Republic of Tatarstan strategy of development of tourism. And Tatarstan used, in Soviet times, for international tourists, traditional route was to visit Moscow, Leningrad, and Kiev as a third place. Now in Russia, Kazan, the capital of Tatarstan, decided to be the third one place to visit because it's Muslim republic, but very peaceful and very open for tourists and to show a bit different Russia. And they are very successful in developing this, in restoration of historical heritage. And now they develop, and the Republic support several towns in the Republic to have secondary level tourism attractions. And they have a good concept. They participate in a federal program, in this World Bank project, which was not started, but maybe will be funded anyway. So this is one idea. And second, also they create some industrial zones, and they're very successful in attracting private funds, also from companies. I think that at Republican level they have support for this, and some big companies invest in this fund to restore some urban environment in this city. Also, they use cruise ships on Volga River, which now have stops in this city, and they have guided tours and provide some touristical services. Okay, also I will mention Yelabuga, also in Tatarstan. It was a federal project of creation of special economic zones, like free enterprise zones. And Yelabuga combine two options, also tourism and historical heritage. Plus, they have this industrial special economic zone exempt from a lot of taxes. And among 11 economic zones created in Russia, this is the best one, and really attracted many industrial enterprises, also in new technologies, and it's an example of very good development. You see how population increased here during the history of the city, but also now we have the growth of population. These are some views. This is heritage, and this is the industrial zone. Yes, they also have some establishments of higher education, campus of Kazan Federal University. Yeah. Okay, so we have other examples because cases of among these 100 towns and cities which demonstrate economic growth and resilience in this post-industrial period, there are very different types. As I said, there are some new resorts with mineral water and the thermal waters. There are towns with historical heritage. So just some images. There are very old historical cities of Middle Ages like Pskov and Novgorod, also with some industrial development. Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk is the capital of Sakhalin region, where biggest companies, biggest extraction of oil we have. So this municipality is not only self-sufficient, but have a surplus comparing with their needs and may invest in many things. So one of few examples of very rich municipality. This is Veliki Novgorod, historical, and some other small towns, but we may discuss it. Myshkin is a nice historical town on Volga River, and also they accept tourists. And mysh is a mouse in Russian, so they use this image of mouse as their brand, and somehow play with this, organize some events, and to attract tourists. Gulsiv. And Belokuriha is an example of resort in Altai with very nice natural resources, and they built very good hotel, spa there, in spite of the fact that it's a bit far away from big centers. But they have very good brand now, and the number of tourists and places of accommodation is rapidly increasing. Yeah, so just to finish, so how actors define resilience? They rely upon uniqueness and value in resources, human capital, environmental advantages, and culture. All this can become a factor of social economic development. And this is expressed in, well, it's a citation from the concept of the strategy of spatial development of Russia, which is under discussion. Increased importance of federal and regional spatial development policy. And local actors also rely very much on federal support, participation in different projects and programs of federal importance, like targeted programs and so on. They all compete to be included in one or other program. And just about research agenda, maybe it's for tomorrow. So development of a concept of resilience of small cities in Russia. It's not yet done. We do not know much about it. Maybe a study based on interviews with actors and surveys of population could help, as well as municipal statistics, which is also recent and started to develop recently and not very reliable, but somehow may be used. A case study of best practices, what we started to do, but deep analysis of, and as a comparative cross-country study, would be interesting to discuss approaches to public policies which may be efficient and may help, or some tools, some instruments, again, depending on the level, and so experience in other countries may be helpful. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Vera.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I'm not an economic geographer, I consider myself as a critical geographer. I don't know if that exists, but I mostly view resilience in the context of perpetuating capitalist crisis. That's why the case of Russia is so uniquely interesting to me, and I think to other scholars as well, because you see this overlapping specialities of state socialism and state capitalism creating uneven urban resilience today. So I think it's extremely interesting to compare that to the cases of German post-industrial resilience, American post-industrial resilience, and Australian. So I don't have questions, but I have two research directions that I think we can undertake, and that will definitely improve the post-industrial network, research network that you guys are collaborating on. I think the first one would be is to acknowledge that dismantling of state socialism definitely caused the massive waves of uneven development in the cities and regions of Russia and Eastern Europe, and as we saw in East Germany in particular. But ironically, what we see is that the spatial legacy of state socialism created this very infrastructure for neoliberalization, which is a very unique case where, well, we definitely wouldn't expect that to happen, but the places, the regions that were very competitive and very advanced during the socialist period that Leonid and Marina just presented, they're doing great today during state capitalism. The capital is circulating through those places without any problems. So the research directions to undertake here would be to explore how these hybrid specialities of state socialism and state capitalism form this unique, uneven urban resilience today in Russia. And the term uneven urban resilience was coined by the professors from the Higher School of Economics in Moscow and the scholars from IFL as well. So I think that's an interesting direction we could go. Another direction is more at the institutional level. And I would call it, and in my work, I call it the post-socialist urban growth machine, which is a very unique case of massive political elites during the socialist periods that now became major players at the economic market in Russia. And here you can see how Gazprom and Lukoil and all giant corporate resource extractive industries are now buying huge swaths of land. Not only agrarian land, of course they're buying agrarian land, but as we know, the urban-rural circulation of people, the farmers moving back into cities, it creates other social movements that we could explore. So if you could unpack this unique institutional aspect of post-Soviet urban regional resilience, that would be also an interesting direction to go. It's not just questions, it's just different suggestions that I see Marina and Leonid presented here today. So we can unpack on those. And first person to ask a question is Tom. Go ahead.
Thank you, Vera. And thank you for your thoughts about the network and some of the directions it might go. I had two questions. One was about the survey data that was presented. I found it kind of interesting to actually see some hard data on that. I know we've talked a lot about culture and ideologies sort of in an anecdotal sense. And so I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about who you surveyed and sort of where that data came from, just to give us an idea of what that entailed.
Yeah, Marina will comment. This is a European survey which included Russia, and it can be analyzed at the level of Russian macro regions.
Macro regions. Yes, this is European Social Survey. It's the data available in the internet on the site of European Social Survey.
But the model was done by Marina, just using this data on Russian cities, which were included in the survey.
Yes.
It was a survey of values, cross-country, but a big sample, including many Russian cities. So Marina just split them into big cities and small cities to compare differences and by macro regions. It's representative at the level of macro regions.
If it's okay. I was also wondering if you could expand a little bit on, you had mentioned intermunicipal collaboration and what that looks like. And I don't know if that, if maybe that came through in any of your case studies, but I was wondering if there were maybe some conditions where that really was fostered, or if there were conditions where maybe that was impeded, and what those might have been.
Yes, as I said, now only settlements give back some responsibilities to the higher level of municipalities at district level. But there are very few and very weak examples of horizontal cooperation, partly because there are some restrictions in legislation of what type of joint enterprises they can create, and partly because they don't have a habit to cooperate. Strangely, after communist period, they are not very communist. I mean, they are very individualistic in a way and prefer to compete than cooperate. But of course, it could be in many cases economy of scale if they are all weak and cooperate in waste collection and processing and in some other, functions that could be profitable. So this topic of intermunicipal cooperation also may be interesting for some international comparative studies with some policy implications for Russia. But also, as I understand, as a recommendation, also federal legislation on municipal self-government should be amended by some provisions. Yeah, question.
Thank you for the talk. I was interested, you said early in your presentation that you had too many small cities, right? So what do you mean by that, and how do you handle that problem? Grow them? Let them lose population, or what?
Yes.
Consolidate? Yeah.
Yes, we should live somehow with this legacy. There was a draft World Bank report on new economic geography and spatial development of Russia, and they were, when they published it, or sort of started to discuss it publicly, it was a big scandal among Russian experts and officials because their recommendations were too radical, that it is economically not efficient, so the government should support relocation of people from some settlements just to kill them and to concentrate population in bigger centers and closer to the western borders. But of course there are a lot of social problems, political problems related with this. And there were cases when big company in aluminium wanted to close one plant, which was main employer in Leningrad region of one town, and population very aggressively protested. Blocked the national road and the highway and so on. And finally, the President Putin decided, to not to close this plant, and found some compromise with the owner of this company. So, plant is not profitable, but some solutions should be fine. So, I'm not so radical as authors of this report, but I think that steps should be done in this direction to optimize from the point of view of economic efficiency the system, but of course slowly and with a system of compensation to people, and trying to attract some activities to places where main employer should disappear. Not easy. There is no easy and simple solution. We should continue to live in this system.
As you've heard some of the examples today, sometimes there can be competition between cities for different economic businesses, industries. Are there examples where small cities have tried to compete for a particular business, either to retain it or attract it, or they don't have as much control, it's more governed by the national government?
Yeah, it's a good question. Of course, there is a clear competition between regions, and this is a complicated game with participation of federal funds and federal programs, governors of regions, and owners or managers of big companies. They all involved. And for municipal level, it is more difficult, I would say, to have the independent policy. But sometimes with an active mayor, with some good local initiatives and with good connections at regional level and at federal level, they can compete. But as I tried to express, they more compete for federal resources from federal budget than in attraction of private investors. And with private investors, I don't know, big companies may have their strategies and their plans where to allocate some new facilities and so on. But it's very often it's connected with natural resources. If not, well, I mean, they may have their own priorities, and it's difficult for the mayors of small towns. It's not so easy to prove them, to justify that they should go there. But there is a sort of competition at this, I mean, level of administrative level. Also, they had, but more at regional level than at municipal level, competition, not good competition, to reduce taxes and to compete who provide lower taxes. And at the end of 1990s, it's finished with bankruptcy of several regions, and then Russian Federation forbidden this for regions with budget deficit, with big deficit at some level. They cannot do it by themselves without federal approval. Yeah. Thank you. Пошли.
Thanks again to all the presenters today, and I hope we have, I think all of you maybe will be able to join us tomorrow, or a good number. We'll be having panels in the morning on the state of the field for theory and evidence, and then also looking at building capacity and connections. And so please join us for the reception up here, and I'm not sure who's organizing the class photo, but we'll just do it now. Yeah. Okay. And whereabouts? Yeah.
Yes.